Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving straight into a forensic psychological investigation today. And it's a deeply unsettling mystery, honestly. Why do highly intelligent, incredibly capable people become literally biologically addicted to individuals who cause them immense pain? We aren't just going to sit here and describe toxic relationships. No, we are completely deconstructing them. We're going to look at what people see on the surface, sure, but then we're ripping that back to uncover the hidden evolutionary drivers, the unconscious motivations, and the cognitive biases that are actually running the show. To solve this mystery, forget the conscious mind. We have to look much deeper, down into the ancient primal wiring designed to keep us alive. Wiring that, terrifyingly, has quietly become the very thing destroying us. The whole mystery of toxic attachment, it starts right here, deep in your nervous system. Look at this quote by neuroscientist Dr. Stephen Porges. He explains how your body constantly scans for safety or danger through a process called neuroception. And here's the kicker. This happens completely beneath your conscious awareness. You don't even know it's happening. So think about it. For someone who grew up in an unpredictable environment, a partner's wild cycle of idealizing you and then suddenly devaluing you, that doesn't trigger alarm bells. It triggers recognition. It feels like home. Your survival instincts are literally hijacked before your thinking, logical brain even realizes what's going on. You don't stay in these dynamics because you're weak. You stay because your primal wiring has basically confused danger with safety. So, let's get into Section 1, the post-separation threat. We really need to first deconstruct the end of the relationship, and I want you to look at this not as a standard breakup, but as a systemic, retaliatory psychological conflict. Because here is what society sees, right? Just a messy breakup. Two people who simply couldn't make it work. But beneath the surface, what's actually happening is a profound, shattering narcissistic injury. See, for an individual with pathological narcissism, separation isn't about grief or sadness. Not at all. It's a direct, agonizing challenge to their extremely fragile self-esteem and their illusion of absolute control. The power dynamics instantly shift, and to defend against that terrifying vulnerability, the abuser just externalizes all accountability and goes entirely on the offensive. And to defend against the intense shame of that narcissistic injury, they deploy a highly calculated retaliatory sequence. In behavioral science, we call this DARVO. It stands for deny the behavior, attack the confronting party, and reverse victim and offender. It's wild to watch once you know what to look for. They systematically manipulate the entire narrative to present themselves as the innocent, wounded victim. This preserves their flawless public facade while completely disorienting the actual victim. Honestly, it is a masterclass in cognitive distortion. So how do they generate proof for this upside-down narrative? Through something psychologists call reactive abuse. The abuser will systematically provoke, insult, and bait their target, usually during high-stress interactions. Basically, they manufacture a crisis just to extract a frantic, explosive emotional reaction from you. And the second you finally break and react, they calmly document it. It's a textbook exploitation of observer's bias. They show the whole world your reaction, but conveniently hide their own relentless provocation. They use your trauma response as objective, hard proof of your supposed instability to the courts, to friends, to outside systems. It's a perfectly calculated psychological trap. Moving on to Section 2, the anatomy of trauma bonding. If we want to understand why a victim stays, we absolutely have to look past conscious choices and examine the literal neurobiology of the trauma bond. Get ready for this, because it's one of the most surprising evolutionary insights you'll hear. This cycle of intermittent reinforcement, it operates exactly like a casino slot machine inside your brain. During the idealization phase, your brain is just flooded with dopamine. You feel amazing. But then comes the devaluation, the criticism, the silence, the sheer cruelty, which suddenly floods your system with the stress hormone cortisol. It's agonizing. So when they finally rescue you with just a tiny moment of warmth, the neurochemical relief is so intense that your brain registers it as profound love. This literally hijacks your brain's reward circuitry. You aren't just attached at this point, you are biologically addicted to the unpredictable reprieve from the very pain they caused you. And compounding this addiction is a wild evolutionary mechanism called betrayal blindness. This is a concept developed by researcher Dr. Jennifer Freyd. Think about it. If you depend on someone for your survival, like a child relies on a parent, your mind literally protects itself by forcing a state of unawareness regarding their abuse. Let's be clear, this isn't just denial. It's a deep, survival-driven optical illusion created by your own mind. The victim's psyche effectively erases the betrayal just to maintain that essential attachment needed to survive. To resolve the agonizing contradiction between the abuser's warmth and their sudden, shocking cruelty, the victim's brain leans heavily on cognitive dissonance. See, the human mind absolutely demands internal consistency. It has to make sense of things. So the victim unconsciously distorts their own reality through motivated reasoning. You start telling yourself things like, well, relationships are just hard. Or you know what, I was probably being too sensitive. Your mind is actively rewriting the truth of the abuse to justify staying, basically protecting your psychological immune system from a total collapse. Which brings us to Section 3, weaponizing the social network. When the victim finally cuts off direct access, the abuser has to adapt. So they launch a proxy war to systematically dismantle the victim's reputation. Unable to strike you directly anymore, the abuser unleashes their flying monkeys. We're talking about third parties, mutual friends, family members, coworkers, who get manipulated by the abuser into harassing, spying on, or gaslighting the target. The abuser completely weaponizes their shared social network just to bypass those new boundaries you worked so hard to set. It ensures their coercive control continues post-separation. So the abuse doesn't actually stop, right? It merely decentralizes. They use your own social network as a brand new delivery mechanism for their toxicity. So you might be wondering, how on earth do they get normal people to do this? Well, they recruit these unwitting participants through some incredibly sophisticated tactics. First, they put on an absolute masterclass performance of victimhood, often complete with real, streaming tears. Then they use strategic truth-telling. They'll share real facts that entirely stripped of context. This totally bypasses the recruit's critical thinking by hijacking their empathy. It activates this primitive crisis response mode where logic goes out the window in favor of urgency. They exploit established loyalty bonds and completely manufacture a false urgency, convincing all these outsiders that you are in a massive crisis and they need to intervene immediately. Okay, Section 4, Family Court as a Weapon. The psychological warfare inevitably escalates from the social sphere right into the legal system, where the abuser attempts to use the courts for ultimate control. Now, there is a very stark difference between what society labels as toxic and what the legal system actually recognizes. Looking at data from Cape Fear Family Law, we see that judges do not care at all about social media personality labels or the latest TikTok diagnoses. They just don't. What they look at exclusively is objective, well-documented evidence of conduct. In court, the abuser is going to try to project their own behavior onto you, likely claiming you're the one alienating the kids. Your best defense? It's not outshouting them. Actually, it's presenting a calm, intensely boring, highly documented trail of evidence that proves their patterns of parental obstruction. When children are caught in this crossfire, the stakes are incredibly high. They are at an elevated risk of internalizing these toxic traits through social modeling or triangulation. But because these behaviors are learned, they can be unlearned or prevented. The absolute strongest buffer for a child isn't fighting the abuser directly. It's actually the sustained, predictable presence of one emotionally stable parent, you. By infusing your home with empathy, maintaining absolute consistency, and using what we call the 30,000-foot technique, calmly explaining that adults sometimes struggle with their emotions, you aren't just managing a crisis. You are literally altering your child's neural plasticity, inoculating their developing brain against the abuse. And our final section, Section 5, Rewiring the Traumatized Brain. Breaking free isn't just a legal or geographical maneuver. It requires a literal neurobiological rewiring to sever this dependency for good. To actually achieve this rewiring, you have to accept the absolute deepest psychological truth of this entire dynamic: narcissistic supply. Listen to this. Your emotional distress, your anger, your frantic text messages, your tears, this is literally the fuel source that sustains the abuser's fragile, grandiose ego. They don't just want you around, they fundamentally need your emotional reaction to regulate their own unstable sense of self-worth. It's all about supply. So what do? The ultimate tactical countermaneuver is known as the gray rock method. The goal here is to transform yourself into the most uninteresting, emotionless rock imaginable, denying the abuser their supply. You keep every single piece of communication strictly factual and just intensely boring. You aren't just giving them the silent treatment or ignoring them. You are mechanically shutting down their reward circuit. You are starving their ego of the very fuel it requires to operate. But look, tactical defense isn't the same as deep healing. According to humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers, prolonged abuse forces you into a state of what he calls incongruence. Basically, you've been systematically suppressing your own reality just to survive the relationship. True recovery demands crossing the massive gap from that forced suppression all the way back to organismic valuing, which is a fancy way of saying you have to learn to trust your innate internal compass again. You have to rely on your own sensory and emotional feedback rather than constantly waiting around for external validation. To physically restore that internal compass, we can look to targeted neurological interventions like EMDR therapy. Think of EMDR as mechanically disrupting the brain's faulty wiring. It processes all that frozen survival energy stored up in your body. It essentially dismantles the physiological craving for the abuser's validation by moving those traumatic memories completely out of your brain's active threat networks. It literally separates your present-day attachment urges from the historical threats that condition them in the first place. It's a total game changer. Understanding this abuse as an evolutionary hijacking, it changes absolutely everything. It allows you to finally stop blaming yourself for staying. You weren't weak. Your biology was simply exploited. But when you finally sever that intermittent reinforcement, when you process the trauma out of your nervous system and step completely out of the abuser's distorted reality, you break an intergenerational cycle. Which leaves us with this final thought. If your nervous system was biologically hijacked to seek safety in the very source of your danger, what happens when you finally become your own safe harbor? The ultimate victory isn't just escaping. It's reclaiming the reality that was stolen from you. Thank you for joining me in this explainer. Keep analyzing, stay curious, and protect your mind.